We have with us today Jon Bullock. He is the executive director of the Redmond Proficiency Academy, a proficiency-based public charter school that he helped found. He is a major proponent of educational innovation, including personalized learning, and he is an advocate for providing all students with a high-quality public education that honors their individuality, honors their background and strengths, and that takes them from where they are to where they want to be. For over 25 years, Jon has worked with young people as a teacher, coach, and administrator. He has combined his passion and skills as an educator with private sector and nonprofit experience to develop one of the largest and most successful public charter schools in Oregon. Jon grew up in rural Southern Oregon, where he learned the value of persistence and the importance of giving back to his community. As a student, he discovered that education provided a path to opportunity, which led him to earn his bachelor's degree from OSU Go Beavs, his master's degree from Willamette University, okay, not Pacific, and his doctoral degree from University of Oregon. Wow, he's a Beaver and a Duck. Wow. Jon's experiences in post-secondary education have confirmed his belief that all young people, regardless of their route to and through the school system, deserve a quality education, and he has built his career around that principle. Jon currently serves as the board chair of the Oregon Coalition of Community Charter Schools and has previously served as a city councilor, as well as an officer and member of numerous nonprofit and community organizations, including Sparrow Clubs, Redmond Executive Association, Kids Helping Kids, Children's Miracle Network, National Association of Student Councils, and Oregon Association of Student Councils. Jon enjoys watching the Timbers, and he is a proud father of a daughter who graduated from SOU. Please welcome Jon.
Wow, thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to spend the next couple hours with you talking about education. No, I'm kidding. Some of you just popped up from your screens wondering, wait a minute, what did I sign up for? No, I appreciate this opportunity. You know, one of the great things about the Zoom era for me is I've got to talk to Rotary clubs across the country. I've talked to clubs in Northern and Southern California, Washington, even Florida, and of course, across Oregon. And so I appreciate the opportunity. I always love to talk to Rotarians and because I think we share similar values. We want to help make the community and the world a better place. And that's what I see in education. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to share my screen and jump in with the presentation here. And hopefully this will work out just great for everybody. There we go. So I'm going to talk today about education in the time of COVID, and I know that for many of you, this is what we've been living. I think I saw Superintendent Parker there. I understand where we are in this time, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on COVID, but rather what I've liked to talk about with people the past couple of years is the way in which we can take lessons from education, the educational process during this time, and apply them moving forward. As we work to help our students get the education they need and the education they deserve, and frankly, the education our community needs. You know, one of the things I think that gets lost in the discussion about education is that education is a public good. I serve as the vice chair of the board of trustees for Southern Oregon University, and one of the conversations we have repeatedly with the community of Southern Oregon is that this is a public good. And as a public good, we need to make sure that we're providing opportunities for us to continue to advance and support our community. And I think public education, K-12 education, is really essential in that. So I always like to begin by letting everybody know I'm a product of the public education system. Because sometimes I say things that some people might find controversial, or some people might think, well, gosh, he's not a fan of public education. When in fact, I truly am. I grew up in Southern Oregon, as Amy said, graduated in the late 80s from Roseburg High School, went on to Oregon State, went on to the University of Oregon. And for the past 26 years, I've been a public educator in Oregon. At one point, I was the principal of one of the 10 largest high schools in Oregon. And for the past decade, I've been operating a large and successful public charter school. We serve about 900 students in Central Oregon. We have a graduation rate last year of 98%. And we send students off to all sorts of colleges and universities. But I think the thing I'm most proud of about the work we do is that we're able to help students who might be the first person in their family to graduate high school, and we work with them on a personalized basis to make sure they achieve that goal. So you see there a couple of things I do. I'd encourage you, if you like podcasts, a colleague of mine and I have a podcast called Education on the Rocks, where we drink whiskey and we talk about education. So if you're into education or whiskey or podcasts, feel free to check us out. Now, here's some things that I think we've learned about education during the time of COVID, and a couple I want to hit on here. First thing is, I'm a firm believer that crisis reveals all. During times of crisis, we learn our strengths, our weaknesses. We learn where we have holes in our organization, and it helps us get better. We know that throughout this pandemic that people who don't have as much have suffered more, and that's brought about needs for things like high-speed broadband internet as a utility for students and families. And we certainly, now more than ever, need to give grace to our educators as we try to navigate what is happening. I mean, just in this week, the number of meetings and conversations about when do masks become not required in schools, and what does that mean for schools, and how do we operate it? I mean, our educators and our public educators need a lot of our grace now more than ever. Well, here's some things I think, though, we've learned about education that I want to touch on. First of all, education is an economic engine in our communities. In many communities, the public education system is the largest or one of the largest employers. It's critical to the economic engine of the community. We also know that education provides community childcare. And I know sometimes when teachers hear that and educators hear that, we do more than childcare. We absolutely do. But one of the things we learned is that when schools shut down, which was just about 2 years ago, that one of the immediate demands was to provide childcare. We needed to provide childcare so people could work, people in our communities could be employed. And so we play that important role. We also know that education is a social and emotional support center. Many schools stood up programs to help provide food or support for families who are struggling. And of course, education is an academic provider. I think one of the key lessons that we learned in all this, however, is that education can in fact happen anywhere and at any time. For years, educators have talked about that we want to create lifetime learners, that we want every student to have access to education, that education happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But in saying that, we still only give students credit typically for the work they do in 180 days throughout the year from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. and that's when school happens. But school and education are different. And we learn that education can happen anywhere at any time during this pandemic. Now, one of my fervent beliefs is that the American public education system is a unique part of the social fabric of our country. In fact, I would argue that the American public high school experience is one of the last connective points in our social fabric in this country. It transcends generations and it transcends geography. We all sitting in this room likely have some connection to the public high school system. And regardless of when we went or where we went, we had experiences like homecoming and prom and football games. And we all had our favorite teacher, and we also had that teacher that you didn't want to have in class. This shared experience is something that has been codified over time in popular culture and in community beliefs and how we view education. Because it has been so codified, we believe there is one way to do high school education, to do the American public high school experience, and any efforts to alter that are often thwarted even before they're able to take root. Now, I share that with you because in my introduction, I said I was a principal of one of the 10 largest high schools in Oregon at one point in time. And in that role, I realized there were students who we were missing, not because there weren't great public educators, not because there wasn't a great effort to help everybody be successful, but because the system was set up to work in a particular way that worked for a majority or a plurality, but not necessarily for everyone, which led me to creating the charter school that we operate now. So I call this the conundrum that education is facing because a conundrum is a confusing or difficult problem or question. Some of you maybe are involved in the nationwide craze of the daily conundrum known as Wordle. And so those of you that are Wordle players know that every day is a conundrum, trying to figure out what 5 letters go together. But for me, when I think about the education system in this country, why is it a conundrum? Is because we typically provide binary choices. So for example, You're either college bound or career bound. You're either going to college or you want a high school diploma. You can either have your education online or you can have it in person. And what expounds this conundrum to a bigger problem is that everyone has an opinion, right? And everyone's an expert, because everyone who's had a connection to a public school, who's been through a public school, has an idea about how that school should run. And we've reached a time in our culture where everyone feels free to express that opinion in a variety of ways, whether that's through social media or email or signs or whatever. But what I've learned from this is that there is a chasm that exists between what we say we want and what we're willing to do to get that. I think by and large, people want a well-educated student population that is enriched and empowered and is moving towards the greater good and moving towards ambitious goals. But I often question if we're willing to do what it takes to get there. And the pandemic has showed us that we can adapt, we can do things differently. Doesn't mean we did them always right, doesn't mean we've done them always better, but we can do things differently if we're willing to make changes. I think that words matter. And so we often use terms like education, school, learning, proficiency. All those words people use in conversation as a stand-in for one another. But if we get down to them, they're not actually the same. And I think when we talk about education and when we talk about school and we talk about learning, we have to understand that those are not the same thing. And if we're going to have serious conversations about ways in which we can enrich the public education system, we have to know that our words matter, and we have to be specific about what words we're using and what we're really trying to describe. So let me give you an example of this, right? Of this conundrum and the way in which words matter. Let me give you a brief history of grades in education and let this stand in for where I see a place where we can make radical changes if we're willing to do what's necessary to get there. So grades are actually a product of a time when the Industrial Revolution and shoe factories and family status were all really important things. William Ferris out of Cambridge, Ezra Stiles out of Yale, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, had a system to categorize people, and they originally categorized people by their family status. Optimi, second optimi, inferioris, and pejoris, and I probably said at least one of those wrong, but you get the sense of what those mean. And it was a rating scale. And then the rating scales grew to be numeric, and then they were based on what division you fit into, and there were 4-point scales and 6-point scales and 20-point scales. But grading happened because it was modeled after what was going on in factories, right? Things were rated. This is an A, or this is an F. It's a failure, and that was adapted into the education system through grades. So Mount Holyoke in 1898 became the basis of the modern day grading system as we know it. At Mount Holyoke, this was their system. But what I find fascinating, right, is that if we go to the general public, and that includes you all watching and listening and those around us, in general, if we went to someone and say, hey, I got a 75%, people would say, oh, you got a C. Like we've accepted that as just the common way in which we do business. And our grades have oftentimes reflected that. I earned 75 out of 100 points. Well, that's a C. I use 75 because when I went to take my driver's test for the first time decades ago, 75 was what you needed to pass. And as long as you got a 75 or higher, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you got 100. It didn't matter if you got 85. You had to get a 75 or higher. And so does that mean a C was good enough? And we're talking about driving a car, and we're talking about a 16-year-old boy driving a car. I mean, should 75 be the cutoff on that? But we've equated that in common parlance to a C. Now, the system grew, and we've widely accepted that this is how it works now, right? It's a 4-point scale, A, B, C, D, F. And what's interesting is when you think about why is it F and why not E? Why does the scale change there? Is because there were systems where E was a rating for excellent and F was a rating for failure. And it would have been weird to give somebody an E, which was failure, when somebody else gives them an E for excellent. And that's how these systems develop. they come into being and then we accept them as this is the way it works. And so across the country, this is how grading scales largely work. And what my argument here is that grading scales, like much of formal education, has not kept pace. We originally had grading scales so that we could classify students and it was connected to the factory economy. Today, grades continue to rank students. Students are ranked by grades. You have a class rank, you have a GPA. And those of you that have been in education or followed it closely know that GPA is an interesting thing now, because in many places you can get 5 points, in some places you can get 6 points, and so you can have a GPA over 4 point. And you can have whatever feels you want about that, but the reality is we're ranking students with seemingly no purpose other than a connection to the way we've always done it, or a simplicity of understanding. And it judges students. I actually do a presentation called Grading, the Ledger of Judgment, to describe the way in which grades have an impact that goes well beyond what we think they go beyond, what we think happens. But so I'm using grades as a stand-in for ways in which education hasn't kept pace. We have a September to June school year, for example. And this goes back to that idea of like, what are we willing to do to ensure our students can be successful? Well, we know that there's a summer slide. In fact, just today, I got a press release saying that the legislature passed another $150 million to go to summer education because they believe it's so important. But we've accepted a September to June school year. And many of you are probably like, yeah, John, it's the agrarian calendar. When actually the reason it got built that way was because public education first took a foothold in the Northeast, and the schools didn't have air conditioning in the city. And the wealthy folks who were going to those schools decided in the summers they wanted to go to the Catskills and places like that where it was cooler, and so there wouldn't be any school in the summer. And that's how summer vacation began. And we've accepted that that's the way it works. I mean, I worked with a school district a couple of years pre-pandemic that wanted to change their school year start time to August. My school starts in August. And the school district, hey, how did you get to August? And the pushback they got was people saying, no way, you cannot start school until after Labor Day because we have to be at the lake and it's summer vacation. And so we know there's a learning loss in the summer, but we can't change it because we've got this in there. Same thing with our school day, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., 5-day school weeks. There was in that same press release, one of the senators talked about how we know students learn best when they're in school 5 days a week. And immediately I was like, I don't know if we know that they learn best there. I would agree that students being in school 5 days a week is a benefit for lots of things, but whether or not it's how they learn best, I don't know. So as I continue on here, let's think about attendance. Educational agencies often use attendance as a stand-in for engagement. And what I would argue is that attending and participating and engaging are different things, but attendance is a measure that we use and we think it's important. And I'm not saying that it's not, but is it the most important thing, right? Because it's really transactional. It's functional, there's a need for it, and when that need's fulfilled, the relationship ends. And so in our state, we have to take attendance in each class to ensure that a student is enrolled, and attendance counts in enrollment. Enrollment drives funding. So it's important, but is attendance the key to student success? I think we can say, yeah, students with poor attendance typically do less well, but it's not necessarily correlated to achievement because we know that a correlation doesn't mean causation. But if a student's not being successful, we should say, well, are they attending? Are they there? But simply measuring on attendance doesn't necessarily get us to where we want to be. And simply assuming that attending 5 days a week for 180 days is the best way to educate is really rooted in an old way of thinking. Douglas Reeves, who's an educational practitioner, philosopher, talks about, this idea that you can read there, 2 decades after the United States made a commitment to standards-based education, most schools continue to prioritize seat time over proficiency. And what I try to promote to people I talk to think about is that personalization and personalized learning is about proficiency. It's not about compliance. And our schools are oftentimes structured around the concept of compliance rather than the proficiency in their learning. Now, proficiency is sometimes considered only revolutionary in education, in the businesses with which I work, because it happens all across the country in other professions. Your attorney, if you have one, or you are one, you pass the bar in Oregon. My understanding of the bar in Oregon, you usually get a thumbs up or a thumbs down to practice. You don't even get a score. And you don't know how many times the attorney took the bar or what they did to lead up to preparing for that. You just know they passed and were proficient. Same thing for airline pilots, right? That the pilot that is flying the plane that you're on may have been a military pilot who then retired and began flying jumbo jets. Or maybe they're a pilot who began training at a community college, and grew their way into that. But at some point, somebody deemed them proficient to fly the plane. My message, and the message I've tried to share with communities when I talk to them, is that public education is critically important. But sometimes we find ourselves rooted in rankings and arbitrary scales rather than trying to figure out how do we get students to where we need them to be for the public good. So personalized learning, simply put, is the type of education good teachers have always envisioned. And it's the ability to put into place a pedagogy that we believe in and kids thrive in. And so to do that, we have to make sure we combine technology with that passion. We've learned through the pandemic that technology is going to play a key role in the future of education. And here's ultimately where I think we need to end up. We have to empower the professionals that are doing this work to embrace the gray areas. We need to prioritize relationships over transactions. We need to prioritize proficiency over compliance, and we need to prioritize student support over student records. This is what makes it a conundrum, is that it's not binary and it's not simple. And anybody who tells you they've got a simple solution to education doesn't know what they're talking about. What I'm proposing in education, what I lobby for and have been working on the past 2.5 decades in Oregon, is this: to prioritize relationships and proficiency and student support, and to adjust those things as necessary to help students get to where they want to be. I grew up in a double-wide trailer in poverty in Southern Oregon. The fact that I now have a doctoral degree and I run a large nonprofit company is not anything that a kid like me was supposed to do. But because educators at some point believed in me, they built a relationship with me, they challenged me to develop my proficiency, they supported me when I struggled. That's what allowed me to be where I am today. And that's the education system that I think we want in this country, is to make sure that students who might not otherwise make it are given an opportunity to make it, because our system is focused on their development and that we empower professionals to do that work. I share all this with you not because I think I've got the answers to fix education, and not because I don't think people are improperly valuing education. I share it with you because I think for our education system to get to where we want it to be, we have to ultimately engage as community in questions as to what do we want for students and what are we willing to do to get there. I appreciate you listening to me today. I think we got a few minutes for questions. I think the chat box has there. I just want to remind you, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's Education on the Rocks. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at @JBullockSpeaks. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here today and to talk with you. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at the chat questions. But if you have other questions, I'd be welcome to take those.
Okay, thank you so much, John. If you want to take a look, there's a compliment from David, and then there's some conversation Juanita started. And then what usually happens is, if there are any other questions in the audience, they'll put them in the chat box and then we'll respond to that. And if not, then we'll go. So maybe you want to take a minute to respond to Juanita.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's common that people have been taught that the agrarian culture and farming is what drove summer break. But in reality, the way it originated in public education, the reason the public education system went the time it did was because wealthy Northeasterners went on vacation to escape the city heat. And it's grown over time across the country, and we've kind of accepted the agrarian part of it. And my argument is, even if it is agrarian in nature, where in our country is the agrarian force, are the agrarian forces so strong that we have to have students out of school to work in the fields? Because that was the argument. And I remember I picked berries. I got paid like 15 cents a bushel or whatever it was. You know, so I know that existed, but that's not what's driving that at this point. And we've allowed ourselves, and for me, it's this idea that we've allowed ourselves to believe that's why, and so we continue perpetuating it. There's a question about imperfect foods. Yeah, Mark, I use imperfect foods. I don't know if you do or not. It's a company that delivers cucumbers and vegetables and things that you can't sell in the store. And the proficiency part of that is this: if you're using a cucumber to slice up and put in your salad, and it's got a scar on one end, but you don't buy it because of the scar, it's still a proficient cucumber, right? I mean, I can still use that cucumber in my salad. And so that's my imperfect foods reference to proficiency.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one more. How much do US students learn in schools compared with students in China?
Wow, what a great question. And so I've been fortunate to go to China on a couple of educational delegations. And one of the fundamentally different things about the Chinese system and the American system is that the Chinese system is almost directly connected to their education system, is almost directly connected to their economic system, right? Your level of education and the school you go to indicates where you will work and what kind of income you'll make. Now, of course, the governmental system is radically different, and that's why. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily better. I'm saying that's how they do it. But what I've seen over there is families willing to send their 6-year-olds to live in dormitories for 6 months a year to get a better education. And so how much they learn is different than what it is they learn and the methodology. But I can tell you the Chinese students I've worked with over there speak multiple languages, play multiple musical instruments, and the like. So it's a different system, but it's got a different focus. Which came first, the 5-day work week or the 5-day school calendar? I'm not entirely certain on that, to be honest with you. But I know that the 5-day work week drives that 5-day school calendar at this point. And that the idea of having school on a Saturday, like they do in some other countries where there's be a Saturday school time, is something that would completely disrupt the community and economic systems we have, right? Even if it might be better for kids. And that really, to me, is the crux of what I like to talk to people about is, what do we want and what are we willing to do to get there? And if we're not willing to do that, then we have to change some part of that conversation.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for your conversation today and for fielding some questions and for being here. Also, I just want to call out Jon for his support of my brother's scholarship fund in Corvallis. He's also very charitable and very generous with his time and treasure. So thank you for that, Jon. And looks like we're out of questions and out of time, but it was wonderful to see you again and to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. You all have a great day.